Kurai Shaliuve. Zadath Akathon Minna.
Both Andy and Patrice weren't speaking English, obviously. They were speaking Vandal, which is a made-up language, but a proper language that was created by Britton Watkins, who's a sort of specialist in creating languages and actually does it for films.
Konglang, apparently, that's what it's called. Constructed language.
Yeah, the language is very guttural. It's kind of lots of sounds, and there's a lot of that going on. Yeah, it's quite rich and it's very fun to do.
Hello, I am Dave Haddock, lead writer over here at Cloud Imperium Games. I'm joined today by
Britton Watkins. Nice to meet you all. I am here working on the languages, the non-human languages, for the Vandal and for the Xi'an.
What is your sort of history with language?
I have had about 5 to 6 years experience with Hollywood-related xenolinguistics, including right now doing my own documentary on constructed languages. I've created several languages, including the Aklo language from the Lovecraftian mythos, my own language for my own indie sci-fi film called Sen, worked on Star Trek Into Darkness, teaching Zoe and the Klingons their own Klingon lines, so lots of different activities involved with alien languages and xenolinguistics.
Cool. And you're also involved with Avatar too, right?
I do know the Na'vi language from Avatar, and that's really kind of my gateway into this whole world, I guess. Okay. I can speak Na'vi fluently, and it's a lot of fun. It's an interesting global community of people who like alien languages.
What has brought you onto Star Citizen, and what do we have you tasked with doing?
Well, in this big universe and on this fascinating set of interrelated projects, I'm doing right now 2 different languages for the franchise, and they are Vandal and Xi'an, also known as Zhan.
We'll get to that a little bit later. So let's kick off with the Vandal. I know a lot of the backers were really excited when they started to hear some inkling of the language from the Andy Serkis Squadron 42 thing. So when you're approaching a language like this, specifically with the Vandal, sort of what was your approach to it? Like, how did you kind of approach tackling that language?
Well, I looked at, there's kind of a standard process to see in the writing what names, personal names, place names, sometimes there's some concepts that already exist that are kind of alien that show up in the backstory. So I looked at that for the phonology or the sounds that would end up in the language. And then they have a very interesting ability to talk verbally and in other ways too, so I took that into consideration. And essentially just wanted something that sounded as powerful as they are, and also not too related to other languages, of course. It's what we would call in linguistics an isolate. It's not related to anything else that we know of yet.
Right.
So I took all of those factors into play, and it's, has a combination of a strength and an elegance to it, I hope.
Mm-hmm. And one of the things you mentioned was the sort of the nonverbal aspects of it, and that was one of the things that I remember when we were first talking about it was, so there's like the spoken language, and then there was the sort of bioluminescence of them, and the application of that bioluminescence in addition to the language adds another depth of meaning. How do you sort of tackle something like that?
Well, the bioluminescence is again something that will play out as the final visuals and the final kind of innate sense of the characters is developed. I looked at the ability to express things with bioluminescence as a way to add an extra layer of tone or mode into the language. And there are also some gestures, some body gestures, arm, hand gestures that fit well into the fact that it's also a military culture. So there are times when silence is required, but you still need to give orders. So the idea that they have a full verbal grammatical language that is based on sound, but also visually are able to cue each other with body movements or with changes in color or other control over those elements of their unique physiology. It just made up a kind of tapestry where the different elements overlap each other in certain cases.
Now, with the written language for them, we actually just got out of a really exciting meeting where you pitched sort of an approach that you had taken to how their actual script developed. Kind of walk us through that process, because I think the backers would really get a kick out of it.
Well, the Vandal basically have the equivalent of 3 fingers or talons, claws, that would relate to or equate to our fingers. So I imagined that when they conquered whomever it was that they were conquering, that they might actually use their talons to tag their prey, if you will, or their vanquished victims.
Right.
So in that sense, I imagined symbols that they might each have as a unique identifier, and then looked at the evolution of that into a formal writing system that maybe later in their culture would apply to their language. So they would take these symbols that were originally for this hero or this commander or this, whomever it was in their history, and use those symbols to become eventually something that is phonetic and useful for representing the written language. Again, evolving over time as any kind of spoken or written language would.
So the individual characters would basically represent sort of a person who did something that is reflective of that character, in a sense?
Well, originally, yes. You can imagine a kind of pantheon of heroes, for example, who through an oral history come down as being famous, and with that also the kind of symbol that got carved into whatever that individual conquered, and those symbols eventually taking on a specific meaning or value. And again, any kind of culture that uses symbols for communication, and by symbols I mean any kind of abstract symbols, could take those classic images from history and then incorporate them into the way they just document their spoken language, or whatever their version for writing their language down happens to be. So over time that could evolve into something that again is just a normal logical orthography, just a modern writing system. They're a spacefaring society, so clearly they need the right kind of language tools to engage in the science that they need to be a spacefaring society. So something that could have been very old and traditional can evolve into something that's very contemporary.
So you have these heroes who basically had marked themselves, enemies that they killed or cities that they burned and stuff like that. So how did you sort of come up with that kind of imagery?
To go through the process of what I imagine might happen on the battlefield as somebody's scratching their tag into something else, I actually came up with 3 polymer clay talons and claws and put them on my own fingers and disabled my pinky and thumb and figured out what actual designs might look like. So it was a process of sticking them on and getting out some tin foil and making impressions in the foil and cutting out the shapes and seeing what they looked like in this kind of raw form that they might have thousands of Vandal years ago, and then imagining how that would evolve into a set of unique characters that are visually distinct from each other, and then how that might, after a couple of thousands of years and lots of technological innovation, be something that would show up on a ship monitor, for example.
Right. So it would go from claw mark to ship monitor font.
Yes. I mean, why not? I mean, that's the way, the same thing happened in Western society with chisels in stone and quills on parchment,
Right,
and
right.
the tools change over time, and the language, both spoken and written, will just evolve to suit where the culture is at the time.
Right.
So we just approached it in the same way that it might have happened, again, with Western tools out of the European evolution. Even lowercase writing is an innovation that came about much later than original writing. In Asia, there's a lot of influence of brush and ink in what happened and how the letter forms started looking. So we started everything from claw 1,
From
claw
that
2,
moment,
and claw number
right,
3.
Right. And yeah, and it had this kind of great kind of calligraphic look in the beginning, but then you could see as it, like you said, it gets ported over into computer screens and stuff like that, it becomes a little bit more refined, and the with some new innovations added onto it and stuff like that. But it was still that you could still see that kind of pull out the foundational, traditional, if you call it that.
Right.
Kind of
Yeah. Writing is just a tool it's another tool that humans or non-humans invent to make everything go more smoothly with all of the elements of culture that writing needs to be a part of.
Right.
You might need a special notation for music, for example, or you might need a special notation for a specific branch of mathematics, for example, and it's all just a tool. So we imagined how it might be used as a tool and might have evolved as a tool in Vandal culture and society.
Right, right. I remember you actually put together, when we were doing the original Vandal motion capture, you put together a sort of packet, and there were, when we were doing auditions and stuff like that for the actor who was playing the Akurai, there were certain vocal qualities that you were looking for. I mean, sort of as from our experience, is there a human physiology that lends itself better to being able to pronounce these languages? Like what were the qualities that you were looking for with that type of stuff?
Well, with the actual performers, I was just looking for a broad range of abilities to produce vowels and consonants that not everyone has in every language. So we have, for example, in Vandal, in the phrase "Tingo mayor dulhe," we have yul is a very unusual vowel that we don't really have in English. Right. And at the end of that sentence, we have a glottal stop, which in English we don't typically make at the end of words like that very often. So the ability of the actors to listen to me having recorded what they are supposed to be saying and then listen to that and without too much pain or crying reproduce it is the kind of quality that I look for in that side of the talent, a kind of innate linguistic ability. It's part of it is mimicry, but part of it is also just being able to hear a sound and then have your brain know how to move the parts of your mouth in order to get that to come out without too much pain and suffering.
O Kurai shall you ver.
Cautious man could I.
Shalim fisatu. Yosakuyam lachnu. Tingu mayul tulhe. Shauda kuna.
See what your bloodlust cost us.
Ilwechach hoshdavo budnato.
And I will say that the people who have worked so far were extremely talented.
Yeah, they're pretty great.
And the burden on me was almost zero because they were cast so well.
Yeah, so. they really, and they got really into it too. Because we'd also talked about earlier about the nonverbal stuff, which is kind of what helps elevate the Vandal into sort of truly an alien language, because it's something that's intrinsic to them, because only they have that combination of stuff. But yeah, when they were sort of developing some of the hand gestures and the things on set, it was really incredible to watch.
Yeah, the language has these kind of mood particles that tend to come at the end of phrases or the end of sentences, and those often accompany movements. And instead of my doing that, we thought it would be, as a kind of, this is what you must do for the gestures.
Right.
We thought it would be better to involve them and let them come up with the gestures as a function of how they felt about the
Right.
emotion of what they were saying.
Playing the scene.
And then I will get to put those in a gesture dictionary and publish them for everybody who cares to learn the gestures.
Right, right. So actually just moving on to the Xi'an for a second. So you're also developing this one sort of in tandem with the Vandal. And we actually shot you worked up a very rough sketch of it early on for some performance capture shoot that we were doing. It's interesting because there was always a thing in the community, which you alluded to earlier, of how do I pronounce it? Is it Xi'an or Shan? And I think you finally have given us a solid answer.
Well, it was interesting to me when I joined the project to hear in the same meeting clearly different people referring to the same people,
yeah,
the
probably
same
the same
culture,
sentence too.
in using different labels. But I only ever saw it spelled one way. So I imagined, okay, what kind of parallels do we have to this in English or in other languages? And frequently there are registers or dialects that are not always reflected in spelling. So there's one standard spelling that's usually more proper and formal and would be used in books or for paper letters or whatnot. And then there's the way people really talk.
Right.
And in the Xi'an society or the Zhan society, they do about 30 years of compulsive military service. So it seemed to me that there could easily be a dialect. There could be this register of language that was used primarily in the military. But if everybody's doing military service, then they would all have this shared second dialect,
Right,
you know.
right.
So in their society now, we are going to be sharing the fact that there is this kind of formal, polite language of government and art and education, and then there's the language that everybody spoke for 30 years in the military, and depending on what you're doing, you might switch registers, you might use the different dialect. So if you're out with your buddies getting intoxicated, you're more likely to be referring to yourselves as Zhan, and if you are in front of a delegation from another planet, then you're more likely to be the Xi'an.
Right.
So we've come up with an interesting way to differentiate that in the pronunciation and in some of the slang and other things. So it should be a lot of fun.
Historically, we presented them with this very austere, very stoic, you know, it's considered immature to show emotion, you know, all that type of stuff. And I think it's easy for people to forget that there's more to them than that, that like there is a side of them, and this helps kind of bring that out, that there's a side to them that there's another layer that you can get to if you're familiar with them enough. Like if you're good enough friends with the Xi'an, they might feel okay talking in this sort of more military slang with you, you know, which is a lot of fun.
Yeah, if they're meeting you for the first time and the language that's being spoken is Xi'an, then they're more likely to refer to you as Lei. But if you're getting intoxicated or you've known somebody for several years and you're hanging out with them, then they might do you the honor of casually calling you I instead of Lei. So that kind of, you would know you're kind of an insider
Right.
if you get referred to as I instead of Lei by a Zhan.
That's awesome. We have these two dialects basically. Are they technically dialects? Would that be? Or?
You could refer to them as dialects or a register. I mean, the more linguistic term is that one is in a higher register and one is in a lower register.
Okay.
But let's call them dialects. I think we have the standard dialect and we have the military dialect.
Could you give sort of an example of like how they would sound? Because you said they're written wise they're the same, but
yeah. So if we think about the kind of funny sentence. Floan sucks at making jokes, Floan being a character name, with THL being a kind of unique sound that they have in the Zhan language. If we said that in the standard dialect, we'd get Olai ha toath, Floan with o war. However, in the military dialect, we'd get Olai ha doad, Droan vedovava. So it's different. I mean, it's the vowels are pretty much all the same, but a lot of the other sounds change in the two dialects. So you wouldn't necessarily recognize the word huawa as vava.
right.
They sound quite different if you're filtering them through English.
Right.
But the Xi'an or the Zhan would filter Huawa and Vava is exactly the same word. One of them is just
more
slangy and maybe sounds kind of southern, like where I was born in South Carolina.
Right. Like, how much do real world languages factor into sort of your design into it? I know that you would stressed kind of an eagerness to allude to current languages, but not make it recognizable to speakers of that languages. So how does that sort of work?
Well, you're doing performance capture, you're doing motion capture with live actors, so they need to be able to pronounce everything. So the phonologies of these languages are pronounceable by human beings 100%, and they will be pronounceable by talented game players and other people who want to learn to make those sounds. So we had to start with a normal kind of human palette. We're not creating sounds in a computer that human beings can't make and using those as consonants or vowels, for example.
Right.
So there's that baseline of using normal human phonology. But beyond that, we want to put the pieces and parts of language together in a way that's unusual and different and kind of fun and surprising. So Vandul, for example, is much more of a kind of synthetic language where pieces tend to clump together and make longer words. And Xian or Zhan is much more analytic, where words tend to be shorter and more independent of each other. So we're taking these ideas of synthetic language or analytic language from human natural languages and also incorporating that into what we're doing in the intentional design of these languages for these cultures so that they have a richer sense of authenticity. You know, the tapestry of the way all the pieces and the parts of the language is woven together is not just oofa toofa doofa doopa voopa, you know, something that people randomly made up a bunch of sounds.
Right.
But they're actually grammatical and they will have vocabularies and hopefully a certain segment of the fan base and the players will take that and kind of run with it and enjoy it and get a whole nother level of linguistic exposure and depth out of the project.
Well, Britton, thanks for taking some time and sitting down with us. I'm sure, like I said, all the backers are thrilled that you are on board and are chomping at the bit, I'm sure, to see some of the work you come up with. But that'll do it for this segment. So thank you all for joining us. Do you have any final words for our wonderful backers?
Thanks so much, Dave. And I just want to encourage everybody to get excited about learning Xian and Zhan, the same thing, by the way. And I'd also like to encourage everybody to be excited about learning Vandul because it's a really interesting language.
Cool.
Thank you for watching. So if you want to keep up with the latest and greatest in Star Citizen and Squadron 42's development, please follow us on our social media channels. See you soon.
Yes, I've been living inside of you, but I guess it's time I set me free, and there's nothing that you can do. I hope you can see. I can't seem to keep people around me, cause I'm scared that they might know the truth all about me. Then they might doubt me, there's no other route. I wanted to shout, but it's too late now cause I'm drowning. Got two-faced like I'm a clown, man. Life is too great, no, it's astounding. I'm in good shape, ma, but you know that I'm drowning like a cup in a cage. I can't cope with this hopelessness, though I try to be open and go with it. But I'm soaking in the pain like the rain never stop flowing in. As I'm floating in a glowing river through a golden gate, trying to motivate. Yeah, I do my fucking best, but there's two voices in my head, I just can't. I just fucking can't. guess it's time I set me free. And there's nothing that you can do. I hope you can see me, 'cause I've been living inside of you. But I guess it's time I set me free. And there's nothing that you can do. I hope you can see.
Babe, what you working like this? You be fine, trust me, just in time we get along. No, leave me alone. Why, yes, can you see that you are alone, big? We're now sitting in our own throne, big. We need nobody, can you see it through? But it's not you who I should be listening to. Guess what, big? Nobody fucking needed you. No, ain't nobody fucking needed me. They never needed us. Like when they nailed Jesus up, there's no fucking heaven, then they don't believe in us. But they my friend, I'm the only one that you can trust. Yeah, god damn it, you an idiot. Go online, be a slave for the media. And you forgot what your father said. Are you serious? Look at yourself, big. You fucking idiot.
Cause I've been living inside of you. But I guess this time I set me free.
Oh, I love you. I love
There's
you.
nothing that you can do.
But the guy is always I see.
I know you can
Can you
see.
see it, big? There's no one else here.
Cause I've been living inside of you.
You have to accept it.
But I guess this time I set me free. And there's nothing that you can do.